Hello, everyone. So, yes, today's an exciting day. We're going to discuss something that's very important. We're going to talk about essentially my take on the short term rental market going into a recession. And, the big question I get asked now, obviously, for context, those who know, follow our business page, know that we typically invest in short term rentals. The big question I ask now is, David, is now still a good time to invest in short-term rental market? And I figured, make a video, talk about this. This would be a good chance to address that question. And it's going to be I'm intending to keep this as brief as possible. Um, Honestly, I want this not to exceed 10 minutes, and so we're just going to dive right into it. So first things first, before we address short-term rental market, let's first address the big question. How does recession typically affect the rental market? And that's very important because that would drive, essentially spearhead our question. So the first thing you want to know is that in general, and this is something good to consider, and we know this because in general that homes aren't right, especially now where we're experiencing a lot of housing shortages. I believe the last I checked from Bloomberg recently made a post that we're about 3.5 million short as far as housing demand, 3.5 million units short, which is about the size of New York City. So there is a lot of shortage right now. So especially now going into a potential recession, let's not, because it's not confirmed yet by the NBER, as we've discussed and covered in our previous video. But especially now where there's a shortage of homes, it means that recession typically historically has had a far slighter impact on the rental market compared to like unemployment and others. Why? And we can see, I love this. We can go to this excerpt here on sparkrental.com, is that basically in a recession, people still need a place to live, and it's right there. People still need somewhere to live. So regardless of how the GDP changes, right? So obviously we know typically two consecutive contractions in GDP typically signals a recession, historically at least. People still need a place to live. And so in fact, in some cases, especially as we've seen recently in COVID, which has driven a lot of the rental inflation or increase in rent prices across several cities, as we saw during COVID, is that as more and more people are driving up demand for accommodation, we'll see the increase in rent prices, and this becomes even more prominent in a recession, where in the cases where people maybe either via unemployment or as we're seeing now with just simply rising interest rates, home affordability drops. And so because of home affordability dropping, more people are forced to rent. And so what you see there is in general that is important to lay that foundation, that while of course there can be, we've addressed that, how home prices have performed going into recessions in our previous video as well, but I wanted to make sure I covered this first in terms of showing how the rental market, or rent in particular, is affected during recession. And the answer is it's slightly affected, or even in some cases actually you could see rents prices go up because the increase for rental accommodation, because home affordability has gone down. Okay, so keeping that in mind, right? So going back to the big question, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a second. So going back to the big question, am I bullish on the short-term rental market? And I'm going to give two answers. So first things first is, I believe that there is a side of the short-term rental market that I am very bullish on, which is something we call pad splitting, which I'll dive into later. Am I bullish on pad splitting? Absolutely. I believe that pad splitting will thrive in this recession for some of the reasons I've just mentioned and what I will get into shortly. But now there's also another side of STR, which is also, so obviously the larger, more popular side, which is the vacation rental market. And I always try to remind people that while vacation rental market dominates the conversation for short-term rentals, there is a growing, as we'll see later in this video, side, which is the rental market via short-term rental platforms like PadSplit.com, Airbnb, Vrbo. But there's a growing demand for longer-term stays on these platforms, which is essentially competing or rivaling the traditional rental market like apartment leases and so on. So for the vacation rental market, something to keep in mind is, it is my opinion that the vacation rental markets that will be least impacted by a recession are the higher tier or more luxury vacation rental market space. Think about it. In a recession, what is the first thing people do? People cut back on expenses. People cut down their travel budgets. Even though I will say, do not underestimate. Something to keep in mind is the wild factor, I would say, going to this recession is the value or priority of traveling that millennials and Gen Z have versus like Gen X's or baby boomers, because whereas baby boomers and Gen Xs do prioritize traveling, but definitely not as highly as we've seen with millennials and Gen Zs, who are more of a where travel is more prominent or viewed as more of a higher priority and less more. So you can see some people reference traveling in terms of like mental health and things like that, and less about simply just vacation. So there is definitely more of a higher priority or higher regard for traveling among the millennial and Gen X, which is what I'll consider a wild factor and will affect obviously travel behavior. Airbnb referenced some of this in their latest Q2 2022 earnings call. But it is, regardless of whether or not it is a priority or not a priority for the traveler, it is safe to say that the market that will be least impacted going to a recession will be the luxury vacation rental market. Why? Because if you think about it, the people that will be least impacted by a recession are really the higher income or higher net worth individuals. And so bringing this back, so of course it's just one of the unfairness of capitalism, and if you will. But you guys can imagine those who are higher income earning or potentially higher net worth individuals will be least impacted by a recession, and there'll still be more free cash flow or budget, if you will, for traveling and luxury vacation rental experiences. So as you can imagine, if you think about it, the vacation rentals or the short-term rentals in the vacation rental space that are more tiered towards the luxury end will be least impacted than versus the non-luxury end. So for instance, I will say the beach houses or the high luxury apartments in, like, let's say Miami or South Beach, for instance, will probably perform better than just a typical Airbnb home in like the middle of nowhere in the suburbs, which, is not necessarily geared towards a higher luxury end. So I think that's pretty straightforward. So my take is pretty much, if you are in the vacation rental space, and specifically the short-term rental space, and your Airbnb or short-term rental is geared more towards higher luxury customers, and then I would say you're probably less at risk of being impacted by a recession compared to someone who's not. Along the same line, I also want to comment on, let's say now specifically, which is what I want to address in this video, the short-term rental space for long-term rental. And that brings me to pad splitting. So pad splitting is something that has become popular, especially since the start of the pandemic. I've actually been in this business since 2018 when I was house hacking and essentially renting out other rooms in my first home, my primary residence, on Airbnb. But basically, it's the idea of renting furnished bedrooms or a furnished apartment. You can see some apartment complexes now are renting units, but it's especially popular with regards to renting furnished bedrooms for digital nomads or travel workers. So going back to share my screen, we can see that there are two things. Since the whole idea of remote work came into place, we can see a couple things have happened. No thanks. Long-term Airbnb rentals on the rise among remote workers. Here's what to know about discount fees, cancellation policies, and this is from insider.com. But you can see there they go into details to talk about basically how Airbnb is becoming more and more popular for long-term rentals, and we see this confirmed in this. If you look at their latest earnings report, the company said that long-term stays where guests stay in a home for 28 days or more remained Airbnb's fastest growing segment. This was reported in the Q2 2022 earnings call, with 25% growth over the year ago quarter. You can see this is August 2nd, 2022, and this was based on their Q2 call. So you can see that there's something happening, especially going into this recession. And just to show an example of what I mean. So this is one of our pad splits. So this is, for instance, one of our pad splits in Charlotte. So as you can imagine, it's pretty much a furnished room where, so in this case, the guest is renting the furnished room, which is the master bedroom in the home. You can see that he has a work from home station, which is going popular, mini fridge, walk-in bathroom, which you can go to, so shower, walk-in bathroom. Obviously, he has a TV, dresser. That's the California King bed. That's a walk-in bathroom. That's a walk-in closet. And obviously, that's the shared space that is shared with other guests because it's a co-living situation. They're renting rooms, and the other rooms in the homes also rented by the guests. And so that's a living area. That's a shared space. That's the kitchen, which is also a shared space. and so on and so forth. So you get the idea. But so what basically renting furnished rooms or furnished apartments or furnished condos or even secondary units like a basement or additional unit in your backyard or a detached unit is becoming popular in Airbnb for longer term stays because there are more and more people that are leveraging the flexibility that medium to longer term stays on Airbnb provides. Take for instance, if I am a travel worker, so I'm gonna give two scenarios. If I'm a digital nomad, I work remotely and I'm able to travel essentially anywhere I want in the U.S. for work, and I can live anywhere. I am probably if I am a millennial Gen Z who loves to travel, loves to explore, loves to be in different cities, it's probably more cost advantageous for me to rent a furnished room, for instance, in different cities, maybe with a host. So essentially a pad, which is called pad splitting. So rent a pad or furnished room versus signing a traditional lease where maybe I know I'll be traveling most of the month anyways, or whereas breaking that lease would cost me 3 months worth of rent to break, right? On the same side, if you imagine you're a travel worker, same idea. Or if you're even moving to a city and you're still on the fence about fully committing to move to the city, same idea. Or you can imagine, like for people who are like, so I'll use Atlanta as a good example. In Atlanta, that for all our passports, a furnished room and a private bathroom could go for anywhere from 15 to 1,600 bucks a month. This might be cost advantageous for someone, especially a travel worker who's probably staying here month to month or wants to stay for like a 3-4 month stay, rather than getting like an apartment or let's say a studio, 1 bedroom in Atlanta, which now can run you anywhere from 1,800 bucks a month, and that is if you're renting month to month, right? So even if you want to sign a 12 months lease in any of the nice areas in the perimeter, that could still run you closer to 16, 1,700, and that is non-furnished versus paying 1,500 bucks a month for a private room or potentially a private bath, depending on the listing, and that includes furnishing, of course, and that includes all utilities. And so you can see that this because of the change in work behavior with remote work, as we've seen how that impacted. This is real because we've seen how that has impacted real estate prices in what we call the up and coming rental cities, which we've covered in the previous video. We also see that impacting as well rental market, specifically the short-term rental market, and being even more specific, pad splitting. Right. So for me, the question is, am I bullish on short-term rentals going into the recession? The answer is yes. I'm bullish specifically as well on the short-term rental market that is pad splitting, where you're renting a furnished bedroom, or it could be a basement, or it could even be an apartment or a studio, which some people do via rental arbitrage, I guess. You can rent a furnished bedroom for anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500 bucks a month in cities like Atlanta, as an example. And again, those tend to follow the rental market, the traditional rental market, versus the vacation rental market. And even within vacation rental market, as we covered, you're less likely to be impacted by a recession if you're tiered or geared towards more of the luxury vacation rental end. With that said, we're signing out. Hope you guys found that useful. And as well, make sure you like and hit the subscribe button for us if you're watching this on YouTube. And take care. Bye.